this is not uncommon for people to practice with open sky mind when we're outside on a clear day and we look up into this brilliant blue clear sky, which we had today here in New England. It was lovely. And just see this sky as no different from your own fundamental consciousness. You know? And just to release into that, not to sort of turn it into any other experience other than just utter simplicity of experiencing your own mind with those same qualities, what we can call mixing the mind. Joan Halifax, great Joan Halifax, has this notion of mixing the mind with the quality of open sky when we're outside on a walk and so on. So you don't have to be in formal meditation just to get a glimpse, perhaps, even a momentary glimpse, as Lama Yeshe tells us, into this really beautiful quality of mind. So it's a pointer anyway, yeah? It's a pointer, it's a way to point us inward. What is outward points us inward. And in the same way, the season, the depth of winter can do this in a slightly different way. This is something that my teacher Leslie used to talk about once in a while. And it wasn't until I moved to New England that I really felt called to sort of listen back to those teachings about what she called the hush of winter and reveling in the inner light. Reveling in the inner light, not just noticing it, but rejoicing in it, you know? Experiencing in very, very subtle ways this joyful natural quality, what some would call, and certainly what Lama Yeshe calls this blissful quality of the innermost mind, the innermost luminous mind. There is in nature, around this time, and in general, it is January 6th, which has unfortunately come to take on a different meaning of late. But usually it is around that time. And one reason why I advocate, and have been for many years now, a holiday of peace on that day. Perhaps more so than ever, that might be a good day to do so. And yet, long before our current problems of the nation were sort of plaguing us, the natives of these lands here in New England, the Wampanoag tribes, as well as the Iroquois, there were many indigenous tribes here in these micro-geographical areas, regions in New England. And this is probably also true for the plains, the natives of the plains up in the northern plains of our country. But this time of year was called the hunger season. And part of that was because there was so little activity in the natural world. There was very little movement, very little animal life, many animals either hibernating or migrating. And so there was just this very natural tendency to cultivate a sense of stillness and cultivate an inward way of being. So this is an opportunity. We're fortunate. I hope that you are all fortunate to be able just to run to the grocery store and not have to go without food should you choose to eat, yeah? But for some of us, this time of year, it's a good time to do retreat, to perhaps even fast, and cultivate the quality of stillness that mirrors the natural world at this point in winter. It is, after all, in general, this time of year, where there is the least activity in nature. The days are the shortest and the nights are longer, so there's plenty of darkness. Although I've been noticing now every day at 4 o'clock, 4:30, it's still somewhat light out. So we're now turning back towards the spring solstice, which is lovely, yeah? The days are finally getting longer. Nevertheless, the way that Leslie used to talk about this time of year is that there is a compelling energy of vitality. She used this word compelling. And we'll remember this hopefully in a moment. It is not a quality of death or dying that for some people this there are no longer leaves on the trees are barren, the skies are perhaps gray. That can remind us of this. But she tells us, don't be fooled by that. It doesn't mean that death is not, and impermanence is not a reality, but rather the opportunity for cultivation here is one that can reveal the secret at the heart of our being. A secret at the heart of our being. And that secret in winter, when there is little activity in nature, is urging us to come back to this impulse to dive into the underlying nature of our own consciousness, of our own mind, in a very natural way that mirrors the natural world around us. And so this is the opportunity during this time of year, and largely it's bringing some clarity, some truth, and some brightness into the places that are usually in the dark within us, that are in the dark when all this other activity is happening, when the mind is directed outward and life around us is vibrant and there's a lot of activity going on. So mirroring this quality, this compelling energy, is that of going into this potentiality. If we're going to really reflect the natural world, that there is this latent, this dormant quality of vitality that is self-generating. This is why, the accomplishment of just busy, hectic, long work weeks in the middle of winter is, in my opinion, utterly unnatural for those of us living in these climates. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't reflect the natural state of things, and yet we push on anyway. Being busy in school, that's why these winter breaks in January from teaching are so valuable for me. And as a California boy coming from the West Coast, of course I lived in New York for many years, but then got reacquainted with the sunshine and the winters in Southern California and Santa Barbara, which you basically are in short sandals and a thick sweater. That's about it. That's as cold as it gets down there. And so coming back here, it was important for me, who doesn't like cold, doesn't like physical discomfort, to find a different way to relate to these winters in New England. And so this is something I've been doing for quite a long time, for at least 15, 16 years. Every year is at least bringing consciousness to this. So I kind of share with you this aggregate of teachings. So cultivating a sense of deep inner stillness and consciously knowing that we are mirroring the environment. We are actually more deeply intimate with the natural world when we do this, and not in a way where there is just an absence of life. On the contrary, we are mirroring a process of renewal through just pulling all that energy, reclaiming all that outward directed energy, holding it at the center, and allowing the potentiality, the vitality of life to simply percolate. Yeah. And then in the spring, when things begin to open, we start being more outward directed into the beauty around us. We can feel more nourished in that way. So this is one of the qualities of this season that I always enjoy talking about. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of animal life out there these days, but we can still do this. We can still cultivate an inner gaze that settles deeply into stillness, into quiet, into brightness that is much more subtle. And it's a good time to be aware of cultivating this quality of luminosity and darkness. It's in a way, it's a sacred process, whatever that means to us. Now, these themes of lightness, as we just read in Lama Yeshe's book, are at the heart of the Buddhist view of the underlying nature of mind, the essence of mind. There is a term, in the Abhidharma, which is the text that sort of outlines the many states of consciousness, it's preserved in in the Pali language, as well as in the Mandarin and the Chinese, I believe, texts that have expositions on Abhidharma. And there are certain qualities of mind that in these earliest roots of Buddhism are seen to be luminous in nature. In fact, in the Anguttara Nikaya, one of the early Pali texts in the canon, the Buddha says, luminous is this mind brilliantly shining. Although it is colored by the attachments that visit it, that visit mind, it is also simultaneously free of those attachments. Luminous is this mind brilliantly shining. What he's saying here is not necessarily that we switch on a literal light bulb. In fact, the notion of luminosity is not the same as kind of the meaning of coming into a room and switching on a light. The luminosity here isn't like a light bulb, but it's much more like a pristine clarity, like a crystal. A crystal, a pristine clarity that is so clear that it is shining, it is bright. This is the meaning of clear light, as Lama Yeshe talks about in this reading. He talks about clear light of consciousness, what is known also, as I mentioned, in the Tibetan as Rigpa. Now, there are two qualities here that are perhaps noteworthy, and one, first, is called the bhavanga-citta. And bhavanga-citta is this very refined quality of mind, of clarity, that is in pure potentiality. In some ways, it is like the impulse of the natural world to reawaken in spring. So we can liken that to our own underlying nature of mind. There is pure potentiality, or what is called the ground of becoming. Now, the ground, the source, the seed, if you will, of awakening is at the heart of this kind of still open consciousness. And it comes with a subtle impulse. It comes with a subtle sort of tendency to seek itself out, as if a lamp is shining so that it can understand its own luminosity. One of the examples that is sometimes used. So bhavanga-citta is that potentiality, and it is that impulse, that urging to get to know more, to get to know more clearly this fundamental nature of mind. And beneath this, at the very, very most subtle and refined level of mind, is this quality called prabhasvara-citta. Prabhasvara-citta. It is the clear, pure, luminous quality of mind, like a crystal that is quote unquote brilliantly shining or brightly shining mind. And whereas bhavanga-citta is the ground of becoming, we can see prabhasvara-citta as the ground of being. It is beingness itself. And from this place is where our deepest realizations are thought to arise. So what I have experienced is that it takes a certain amount of surrender to allow this process to arise naturally. After all, we can't necessarily go in search of it with any kind of effort. Quite the contrary. Much like the natural world has a process where it begins to shed and drop, and the leaves fall away, the grass begins to get dry, the earth freezes, the water becomes less flowing. I mean, this is very natural. In that same way, we're working with our own mind, our own densities, the density of emotions that can be so difficult to surpass in order to quiet the mind and settle it into a subtle place. So there is this quality of surrendering, of what we could call renunciation, of just saying, okay, not now. In fact, I relinquish all of this outward directed energy. I reclaim that vitality back into the seed of my own becoming. I surrender to this, and not with intellect, not with trying to think my way there, but even surrendering the mind that needs to understand, that needs to know, into a very refined form of simplicity and abiding. And this can take time, and we may shift in, we may shift out. We may actually go on a walk, as Lama Yeshe tells us, and mix the mind with the sky. It's another method that helps us to kind of come to that realization, and maybe we drop in for a second, and then it's gone. And if you're like me, the second you do drop in, you're like, oh my gosh, is that it? And then it's gone. It vanishes the second you try to own it or control it. And so part of mindfulness practice here is simply in continuing to bear witness with some equanimity to this quality of mind that is very subtle. It's like refining gold. This is often talked about. We're refining gold into its most pure and pristine thing. The only thing here is that the refining we're doing comes by surrendering and releasing into this quality, and being and practicing a sense of patience, a sense of abiding, and just noticing that the thoughts and the triggers and the things that come and go, allowing them simply to manifest, and not fighting them, following them, or feed them, or freezing them if it's winter, but letting them just sort of arise and disperse, holding all that arises in the same way that this beautiful blue sky holds all the clouds that just on their own gather and disperse. You it's also, there's another analogy that Lama Yeshe talks about in this book, that it's like this clear blue open sky that has factories and this belching smoke from factories that release the smoke into the sky. Now, let's not get into sort of the environmental degradation piece of all of this, but the idea here is that the smoke and the sky are not the same, that the smoke dissipates and the sky remains open and clear. We only imagine that it becomes polluted. Now, that could be argued from an environmental standpoint. I get it. So let's not go there. But let's at least allow this notion that the mind is more so like a mirror that reflects forms than actually takes on the forms. This is another way of talking about mirror mind, brightly shining mind. I will finish up here in a moment. Yeah, so the last thing I'll say is that when the Buddha talks about emptiness, what we call emptiness, which is a poor translation of shunyata, that was his only word for the underlying nature of mind, shunyata, which we often translate as emptiness. And shunyata really rather contains this quality of profound, spacious openness without content. This is, I think, a more accurate way to define shunyata than quote unquote emptiness. It's not a vacuum, yeah? Because at the heart of this quality of spaciousness is this quality of brightness. It is a fullness of awareness. It is a fullness of experience. At a time when the ego, when that aspect of who we are feels as if it is lacking fullness. Does that make sense? So if we're feeling a sense at any point as we enter 2023, a sense of dissatisfaction, of quality and absence of wholeness, just receiving and releasing and surrendering back into this subtlety of mind, this quality of openness, to help fill us up again with this experience of fullness. And this can begin simply by becoming conscious and aware of this beautiful fundamental quality of a spacious, clear mind.